This is fantastic. We're live on the air with Julian II, who is an author and executive health consultant with Executive Health, www Executive Health. You can see /. You can check that out. That will be clickable later today on the podcast description. And we want to let everybody know that we're on Newsly. We're a featured podcast on Newsly, so you can stop scrolling and start listening. Use coupon code GHOST to get 1 month free premium subscription. And how are you doing today?
Man, I'm doing super fantastic. How about yourself, man? I'm. Thank you for having me on. I should say first and foremost.
Yeah, but it's always fun to podcast, interview people from all over the world. We've been doing podcasting since 2016. From our initial focus had been on musicians and artists, and now we've expanded to all kinds of people, CEOs, life coaches, shamans, all different types of people. So we find different people to talk to. It's expansive, like our music. We've decided to go in an expansive route rather than a narrow route with our podcast. So thank you for being
Mhm.
on the show.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So, like you are an author and executive health consultant, and maybe you can tell me what is an executive health consultant?
hmm Yeah, so I usually when I usually get it's kind of a title given to me, but in those things, it's usually a couple different meetings. So on the surface, you would probably say when you see executive, you think this is just solely for executives or something like that, which is not necessarily the case. A lot of people are in some type of leadership role, but uh, the bigger picture of it is someone who is encouraging people to be the CEO, the executive of their health and life a lot of times, and to approach their health as if they are a Fortune 500 company and look at it like an organization, looking at it like a a big operation that has many different facets to it. I look at health as this giant ecosystem where you have all these different pieces that intertwine with each other. They don't exist in silos, but they're all dynamically connected with each
Mm-hmm.
other.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it because I was thinking, like I deal with a lot of creative people, and a lot of
Mhm,
people basically, musicians tend to be independent today, so they have to control everything. They're not on a label, and so I think a lot of the artists they deal with maybe haven't really focused on their health because a lot of artists they
mhm,
focus on their and then they don't focus on, oh, I should actually have a plan besides the plan for my art for
mhm,
my life, and not just like a health plan, but maybe like mental health and
mhm.
spiritual health, all different types of health. And some people just will think about narrow, oh, I need a Blue Cross Blue Shield plan, or I need something. Maybe you need a whole holistic view,
Mhm.
which it sounds like that's where you're coming from.
Yes, and the ironic thing is that I actually look at myself as an artist. You know, health is like a artistry to me because one of the things when I'm looking at a person, it's a blank canvas at the very beginning, and and then you're basically taking a bunch of different instruments is what I you can kind of look at it, and you're creating a symphony. You're creating music with this, and that just happens to be maybe your nutrition. That happens to be maybe looking at different lab reports, looking at different genetic testing, and other different things that are associated with aging. But all in all, you're creating this sound of music that's just like health, and so that's the only reason. One of the big things is I'm a little monotone, so I can't sing. So that's why I didn't go into industry.
Mhm.
But but I'm very but I get a lot of inspiration from music and the art, and I try to bring that over into the work I do.
That's really cool because the whole idea of expansive, like my record label or my methodology is called expansive sound. And expansive sound is this idea that I'm not in a silo. I
hmm
could do jazz, I could do fusion, I could do rock, I could punk, or whatever. And also that it's not just music. Like music, like a lot of people when I first started say, well, how can a musician talk to a life coach or talk to a shaman or talk to somebody other than a musician? I said, well, because musicians are kind of like life coaches. The Beatles actually made a lot of people become musicians. John Lennon got people to go into the, peace movement. Marvin Gaye got people to think about the ecology. So a lot of things can cross over, and so I'm all about the kind of crossover of everything in life. And I'm a Buddhist, so the idea of expansion goes beyond just music. And it's cool that you thought of it as music in what
Mhm.
you're doing.
I read a very good book a long time ago. It was, I think it was Nietzsche and Buddhism,
Oh,
and
that's interesting.
yeah, I think that was because from Tina Turner, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so I read the book. I forgot the name of it, but it's a very good book on Nietzsche and Buddhism and some of the. And I think one of the things that's always stuck out to me there is I think it's changing poison into medicine. I might have messed up the quote a little bit, but it's something along those
Mhm.
lines of turning poison into medicine, something like that.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because I practice Nichiren Daishonin Buddhism,
Oh,
which is
okay.
like a Japanese form of Buddhism, which my
Hmm.
wife got me into when we got married. But I was already kind of in that headspace. I didn't know what to call it. And then she kind of framed it with the philosophies. And I actually lived in Japan for like 2 years back in 2004. And it was a really cool spiritual journey to kind of see that between looking at, the typical spiritualism that's in Japan, which isn't necessarily Buddhism, but there's other types of practices there. But yeah, it's just I try to have a kind of holistic point of view and kind of universal concept of karma, or the idea of the yin and yang, and putting energy in, getting energy back.
Hmm.
Thing about positivity. You put positivity into the universe, you get positivity back. You put negativity, you get it back. They're like, it's that kind of physic
Hmm.
thinking along with spiritual thinking that's kind of connected, like, between science and spiritualism, which I think a big part of everybody's total self.
Absolutely, it's giving and I also look at it as kind of a cause and an effect, and like you said, it helps my decision making. So I do these things. This is more likely the effect I'm going to get. If I look at this thing, I can. There's not too many things that are per se bad. A lot of this is just our perspective,
Hmm.
and how that perspective is shaped can often determine what's going to come afterward. And that's as I look at this from a health perspective, and you mentioned mindset and mental health, and that's a big part because a lot of times when we think about optimal health and health in general, we think about it from an external standpoint, then internal, where it's really the opposite. It's really
Hmm.
starting from inside, and then it's going to manifest outside. And because one thing I'm noticing
Yeah,
more, a
yeah,
lot
I
of,
believe that.
mhm, especially a lot of times with some of the people I talk to now, is that there's so many awesome health technologies out there now that you can utilize, and people usually want to gravitate and use those things first. But I have to remind them though that it's akin to being like Iron Man and Tony Stark, right? Um,
Yeah.
that armor, are you Iron Man, or so who are you? Who's controlling that, right? And so are you the technology, or does the technology just help you? And so
Hmm.
um and so that's why, like, really taking care of that foundation, that inside, then getting everything else to come in is really going to help you catapult you.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, like, if you have high performing people, like, one of your things was like, how can high performing athletes and entrepreneurs stay in their peak performance? And I think a lot of times in business and in sports, you get so narrow minded, you get into a
Mhm.
lane and you do something and it's totally for that performance, but then you don't think about the other things. So
Mhm.
maybe you're not thinking about your spiritual health or your mental health, and you're doing something that might be destructive to that, right? But it's actually positive for something else, but it's destructive to another piece of yourself. And I
Mhm.
think it's about the balance. Everything to me as I get older is about the balance and not going to extremes. Is learning how to
Mhm.
actually know, what to eat, what to do, live a more balanced life. You tend to be more have equilibrium. If you
Mhm.
live like an unbalanced in any way, you tend to get a little off
Yeah.
off
Uh-huh.
where you should be.
A- and that notion of balance is going to look different for each and every one of us, and that's the thing that we also have to keep in mind. My definition of balance is probably going to be different than your definition of balance, and so
Mhm.
we're constantly pulling on these different levers that we have, and that's the whole dance that we're involved in, and that's in a nutshell, that's life in general. It's just that it's this delicate dance.
Yeah, because everybody's like, mid range is different.
Hmm.
It's like when I'm working with different instruments, they have different capabilities to keep them in the sweet spot. And as a musician, I play different types of instruments, and they're not all the same. Where the sweet spot on one instrument is versus another one is not anywhere near the same place. And so, like you kind of learn in life that yeah, you'll find that. And even when I'm working with individuals as a producer, an approach toward one person, they would get the best out of them is different than another person. You kind of got to read each person as you see as they come to you.
Hmm.
And whatever worked for one artist I'm working for doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work with every artist I work with. You kind of got to look at that person and actually listen to what they're saying and listen to what their body is saying, what their spirit is saying, what their mouth is saying, and what their actions are. And then you can kind of figure out just because what worked with 10 other people doesn't mean it's going to work with them.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's one of the superpowers that if somebody can get this superpower down, I think it really helps you in life is to have the ability to see the world through the eyes of other people, and and even if you don't agree with it, or even if you think it should be something different. For example, a lot of times somebody might come in and say, I have a weight problem or something, or I have a sleep problem. And I'm looking at it. I know in my head that they have maybe a nutrition problem that's affecting their sleep or something. And instead of saying, hey, you actually have this, it's actually easier. And I'm sure you probably do this too when you're working with an artist to kind of tweak everything and say everything and present everything through the lens that they see the world. And that's just going to
Hmm.
help. That's just going to help build a connection. So you're still getting the objective done that you is most likely needed, but
Hmm.
the coherence and the synergy that you're going to have is going to be much more seamless and less friction because you're seeing the world through their perspective.
Yeah, I think that's like everybody is an individual, but there's some commonalities with all humans, right? So there's
Hmm.
like you should if you come at it with a respect point of view, like
Hmm.
if we respect the differences and you don't kind of ram your own ideology down somebody's throat, I think you'll tend to work better if you find the people coming from different frame points. And so the more you work with people in all over the world, you start to find that sweet spot because a lot of it is like everybody will say listening skills, right?
Hmm.
If you listen before you start a speech, with when you talk to somebody, if you're trying to get their impression, if you just start off and they go on and you never really heard what that person's saying, then they might not tell you who they are once you tell them who you are first.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're spot on with that. You're 100% spot on with that.
But I guess what's the critical mistake most people make when it comes to like an executive health concept? Like what do you have to try to like have people kind of unlearn or unpack or show them like a different perspective?
Yeah, this is actually kind of just a more of a societal problem as well. If you look at the way that we approach health, at least in the West and especially in the States, I can't speak for every country, but I can speak pretty strongly about how things are in the States. And we look at everything through the lens of what I call sick care. And we
Mm.
look at it, we look at everything through disease or sickness, right? And there's really no action taken until the symptom or the illness
Oh,
manifests itself and you can clearly see it. So even
yeah.
some of the top notch um quote unquote executive health programs offered from by hospitals, they will see everything through diseases and sickness. And so sometimes, well, oftentimes, that a lot of the necessary tests and potential tools available out there won't be used because there's really no quote unquote need right now because this person doesn't is not showing these things. And
Yeah.
my thing is like the best way to defeat aging, the best way to defeat a lot of the chronic illnesses is to never have them in the first place. It's to never age. And I know that might sound crazy. Like, what do you mean age? We get older. Well, you might chronologically get older. So I might go up in the number of years that I've been alive in this world right now and trips around the sun. But on a cellular level, I do not have to advance just because my chronological age is advancing. And that's a critical distinction that I would like to see made more. And is to look at things not from a sick care perspective, but from a quality of life and from a performance standpoint, and a way of not only just increasing the health span, but increasing the lifespan and the well span as well. So it's great to increase the number of years that you're going to live on this earth, but what's the quality of
Yeah.
those years
Yeah.
that you're having, and what are you doing during those years that you're alive? How are you performing, and are you fulfilled in those years? So it's keeping those three things in mind.
Yeah. It's like preventative care because I'm a cancer survivor. When I was
Hmm.
27, I had a level 3 sarcoma,
Oh, wow.
and I didn't have any history of that in my family.
Hmm.
And it kind of came out of nowhere, but no one was testing for it until it actually presented itself. And I was lucky that it was an external cancer that grew so you could see it. It was on my back.
Hmm.
If it had been internal, it probably would have killed me because I would have never known to even
Hmm.
test for it. So I went through that whole experience, and it really changed my mindset. I started, looking at what I was eating. I hadn't smoked, I hadn't been doing drugs, anything. So I just got more into, cycling and hiking and eating, things that didn't have pesticides. Like really started looking at chemicals in the environment and pesticides and carcinogens and all kinds of forever chemicals, and started really, checking out my environment and maybe where I had interacted with things that could have caused it.
Hmm.
And I really started, researching VOCs, and I started really checking out like the impacts of these things that people, for convenience sake, put around them and don't consider the fact that they could hurt them. And I just had a different point of view, and that's not everybody's point of view, but I just started living in that way, and I've been cancer free ever since then. Um, but it was a hard thing to go through. But like I think it's like preventative, like people need to find out ways to stop that from happening and just presenting.
Hmm.
I do agree with that because I went through it.
Yeah, and you're not. I don't know if there's a. You're not going to prevent everything. You're probably
Mhm,
not going to catch everything, but there still is a huge gap. And there's a lot of things, like a lot of the things that usually takes people down and usually severely hampers their quality of life and shortens the years of the average years, is a lot of these things are preventable. That's the big message, that a lot of these things are preventable. Even if sometimes people like to use genetics, and weight runs in our family and everything, and that's such a very, very small percentage. And I think that message is just not being you know taken home enough in this world.
Well, I think diet too, because one thing I found out with a lot of my cancer doctors, my oncologists, they didn't consider diet at all. I
Hmm.
actually had to go to outside dietitians, and they didn't
Hmm.
consider that as like a factor. And I really started like looking into it on my own, and they had no real solution other than their chemo and radiation and all the
Hmm.
medicines they would give me, but they didn't tell me to change what I was eating. They
Yeah.
wouldn't tell me to, drink more water or do this and do that. They just kind of focused on the medical aspects or like technical aspects without
Hmm.
thinking about the, maybe even spiritual aspects,
Hmm.
or like, being able to meditate. Like I started to meditate within my Buddhism and chant, and just that focus of that breathing, that kind of Tai Chi type of behavior is very important. I think to your overall health is part, with the medicine, with the food, with the diet, with the exercise, with the water. You know,
Hmm.
I think people don't think about those things.
Yeah, and speaking on probably why they didn't talk about nutrition. I had a brief stay in medical school. I did a year of medical school before leaving, and it's not really in the curriculum. You're not going to really have a deep dive on like nutrition, and if you do, it's like a little outdated stuff. It's like the food pyramid stuff. But
Mhm,
then, not to even go down that rabbit hole, a lot of times that stuff is sponsored and has special interests. We'll say special interests. And so
mhm.
and so that's not necessarily what's going to be in your best interest. And and so I think probably it's best to have kind of the best of both worlds, because that world is very good at like emergency treatment and very, you know, serious illnesses that can take us out. We do definitely need that, but we also have to keep in mind that how are we living each, day by day, minute by minute. And that's where, like you said, learning about nutrition, learning about meditation, learning about more physical exercise, and getting the little ins and outs of that, combined with that, just in case something does happen. That's the world that is more ideal. But and so I try to have grace a lot of times with, the profession and everything, because I do know that the curriculum is not set up for that. A lot of times they're overworked. They don't have a lot of time. I get to spend an hour, even more. I get to spend however much time I want with a person. So I really get to learn the person. I get to learn the
Mhm.
psychology, how they think, what's going on in their life and everything. There's no way that you can get asked that question in 15 to 20 minutes
Yeah, yeah.
at,
The
at a stand,
normal,
yeah,
yeah,
at a standard visit.
standard
So
visit.
yeah, I understand, just that's just how the way the systems work. So
Yeah, and it's getting even more industrial and corporate where they're checking the performance of how many people they can pull through these
mhm,
clinics because it's fortune companies making profits.
mhm,
And so if you take extra time and you're not supposed to, you get dinged. So
yeah,
so from a performance standpoint,
yeah. Yeah, you don't have time to read all the different latest research, or hey, this new test is coming out, hey, this potential cancer detection blood test is coming out, that's, maybe people over 50 should look into, all sorts of these different things. You don't really have time for that, because you're inundated not only with patients, you know by 15-20 minutes, but you also have insurance papers, you have all this other red tape stuff to take care of. So I have a little more grace for it. I don't like the way it's set up, but I do have grace, because I see that the system that this it's the system's almost kind of rigged a little bit.
yeah, well, it's good to think to include we have I mean, I deal with some homeopathic,
Hmm.
people that we deal with outside of our normal doctors. I have a normal doctor, but then I have
Yeah.
homeopathic doctors, and something we learned just after the cancer that, I just like to have that input, and there's other things I'm in IT, and I switched to a stand-up desk with,
Hmm.
a treadmill in my home, and I work from home, and I got rid of my crazy commute where I had to be jumping on planes and Ubers, and I was spending all this time, like 10 hours a week in planes and Ubers, and now I can take that time and actually exercise and go walk and hike and snowshoe. So
Hmm.
I can space myself time. So it's like I own my time. I don't have to I know you have to start to stand up for what you would need in your life
Hmm.
and not get thrown onto a treadmill where you're sitting on a plane or you can't do things. You're eating bad because you're eating junk food because you're trying to run to the airport, run to the Uber, run to that. So you don't get to cook your own meals. You don't get to control your food. You get a lot of junk food. You do a lot of high pressure stuff. If you can change that and you can kind of force it, like, hey, I'm valuable. I don't have to do that.
Hmm.
I can still do the work and I don't have to do what you told me I had to do 10 years ago. I don't have to do that.
Yeah, it's about choosing you first and foremost over yourself, and once again treating yourself like a top notch company. You are each and every one of us is a company and an entity and organization. You're incorporated, even if it's not on a piece of paper or anything. You are incorporated, and you think about this, that even there's people that depend on you. Whether it's another spouse, whether it's kids, family, etc. And when you don't put yourself first, when you don't really take care of yourself, all that, it's impossible to actually give your best to these other people, because your own bucket is not filled. And I think that's a thing that we oftentimes miss, is that we will let ourselves wear down so much just to give to other people, and then we don't give that care back to ourselves, and we end up becoming sick and everything.
I think, yeah, you do have to I know a bunch of guys that were IT guys, and they'll sit in the chair for 10 hours, 8
Oh
hours,
man.
and it's, not good, and then they get back problems, they're overweight, they're eating junk food, and I told them, it's like, just trying to suffer through it to say that's doing a good job. Like, when I've had to manage these guys, like, I'd rather have you go take a break and walk or go to the gym or, go make your lunch instead of ordering something and actually, decompress a little bit and walk away and then come back. Cause I think you will actually do a better job than going straight through like 8 hours straight without taking a break and actually giving yourself that mental space to go back and look at something.
Mm.
And
Yeah,
some people just look at, oh, put the time in and that's what's valuable. And I'm like, no, it's the quality of what you put in.
you're gonna be much more productive by doing that, and sometimes that feels like a paradox that by taking time away from actual work and going to do this activity, that the quality of my work is going to increase, even though I'm putting in less time on it. And so that's a concept that sometimes takes people a little getting used to.
Yeah, 'cause I found that as I got older, when I was younger, I was one of those kids, going into it, sitting at the desk in the cubicle, staying there 12 hours, you know, thinking I stay until 10 o'clock at night, that's what's doing it. And then you're like, you have bad returns after a while because you just were not doing as well as you thought you should be.
Mhm.
And actually taking the time to go mountain bike, go hike in the woods, take a walk, make my own dinner instead of eating some junk.
'Cause a lot of times
That could be
you get
way more.
a lot of times you get very some of your best ideas comes so like after we get done here, I'm going for a long run, and the type of ideas that come to my head when I'm running and everything, it's unbelievable. And even if there's certain problems or things that you're thinking through, you would be surprised at what happens when you kind of separate yourself from sitting down this computer and just getting out in nature and just getting some
Yeah,
fresh air, getting some exercise, letting those endorphins do their thing. And it's a whole stress relief
yeah,
that comes
I've
with that.
found that if I go hike or mountain bike or fish or something, 'cause I live in New Hampshire, so I have
Mhm,
all kinds of opportunities. I have trails all right near me. Like I can walk to a trail, get lost in a trail, and I find that if I go in that trail and I've been working on something on my synthesizers, I'm a synth guy, so I have all these synthesizers, and I find that got keyboards and stuff, but I find that I get better ideas after I take a break and
mhm.
go for that walk in the woods or mountain bike that I'll get some thing and it'll just pop up in my head and I'll get back into my studio and I'm refreshed. Then just sitting there banging at it like just straight, like just like the computer kind of operator, just sitting in there without taking a break is not actually the best way to do it.
Yep, absolutely. So, like for me, before we got on, I had like an hour and a half of just some thinking work and just kind of writing some things out and thinking about this project. And then it's halfway done. And then as I go run, and then I come back. When I come back, I'm going to have a new set of eyes on this, and I guarantee you that this thing's going to look much better by the end of this night because I did a little bit, but then I'm getting away from it, giving the project time to breathe. And it's almost like I think about like when I was writing a book, you get that first draft out and you give it some space, you let it breathe, and then you come back again the next day or two with a fresh set of eyes, and you're going to see things differently. And I think that's probably maybe how it is in music, kind of how
Oh
I
yeah.
imagine it, where like you lay the first track down, then you come back later, you hear some things, you get to think about it a little more, let the idea marinate more. And then you're going to add these little different intricacies into the beat and the song. And that's going to really make the thing pop. I guess that's how I imagine it. I haven't been in a studio
Yeah.
too many times.
Yeah. I would tell you what happens. Like I have a home studio. You can see all this gear,
Uh-huh.
but basically what I'd like to do is I have all kinds of tools. I have some that are really small. I can just go out and I have one that's the size of a TV remote,
Hmm.
and I can just walk around and sketch ideas on it, and then I can like talk into it and leave notes. But then I have other things where like I'll put some multi tracks down, and I'll go back to it from like 2 months ago,
Hmm.
and I'll say, hey, this actually is working now, because where my head is now, I see where I can finish this. And so it's like it is kind of like Frank Zappa used to do that. He used to go record his stuff live. everything he did live, he would record. He'd go home and he'd do stuff at home and he'd record so many different things. And he'd go into his living room and there's all these pictures of him, like taking tapes from live studio recordings and just going through them with his headphones and saying, hey, this thing worked with this thing and this thing worked with that thing. And it was basically, he'd give himself time to kind of put it down and then go back to it. And a lot of times with musicians, when I tell kids, like, when I'm working with kids, like, hey, we ain't going to do like 99 takes. We'll do like 3 or 4, and then we'll walk away and then actually work on something else and then come back to it. And it tends to work a lot better than trying to sit there and do one song for like a month. I find that just burns you out. It just totally burns out, and all the creativity is like totally blown away.
Yeah, because I think
if you
there's
do
something.
that.
Yeah, I think there's something about creativity that you can't just really force it and suffocate it.
Yeah,
You
definitely.
you just can't do that. And I imagine this is what it's like when you're like trying to force yourself to make a like a pop top 40 song. It becomes
Yeah.
it becomes very formulaic and takes a lot
We
of fun
tend
out
to
of it. I
clone
imagine.
you tend to clone other people.
Hmm.
Instead of doing something original, you tend to start doing the common denominator is clone something else
Hmm.
that worked.
Yeah.
Where I'm always from the kind of mindset is I rather do a version of my artist, right? If they give me a demo,
Hmm.
I rather make that demo sound the best version of that of themselves
Hmm.
rather than make them sound like another producer.
Yeah. And ultimately, this is for work or people who are starting a business or even with their music or any endeavor. And a lot of times, even with health, is that y- 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 how someone got their goals or their success, whatever you want to call success, or achieved this thing, is not really going to be how you're going to do it because we're all unique. Some of the ingredients can be the same,
Mhm.
but the total makeup of that thing is going to be different. And this is something that I initially struggle with when it came to the health industry and this endeavor, is that you see something that's getting a lot of engagement out there, a lot of likes, a lot of, and you're like, that almost tempts you to do this, right? You're like, man, I should do this. This seems to be working for this person and that person and that person. I need to do this.
Mhm.
And I think that's a trap. That's the trap, because
Yep.
I did that. I did that in the early stages. And one, you don't even feel like yourself. Like you're creating this stuff, but there's no soul in it.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like you.
It's not
And
you.
yeah, and it's hard to do. And you oftentimes feel this resistance. I think about this with social media, and I'm still figuring this out, even with podcasting as well. Is that it's finding your unique voice and being comfortable with that, and then experiencing those early stages where you're doing this, you're presenting yourself this way, and maybe it's a little different, so you're not getting that feedback that you're doing the right thing, but it feels like the right thing, but you don't have a lot of the external metrics to
Mhm.
validate you. So you're just having to rely on just your intuition
Your gut
and
intuition. Yeah.
your gut. Yeah. Because
Yeah.
that's what, like I said, that's kind of what I did with this, because Executive Health was not my first website. It's
Mhm.
not the first. It was a rebrand, but it's something that I always needed to do and knew I needed to do. But it was um it took a lot of, I would say, I don't know, inspiration, a push to myself to make happen. Um, and same thing with, like, I don't have an Instagram or certain ways that most traditional health and fitness people kind of promote themselves and everything. I chose not to do that. And so I think, kind of to sum this part up, is for those out there, is that I know you have a lot of artists on there. It's just to really um, stick with being what makes you you.
Yeah.
Take a few things that maybe are foundational to
Mhm.
whatever is your particular industry, and then bring your uniqueness and hone in on that, and then just give it time to marinate. And I think people will come along, and it will work out.
Yeah, because I'm kind of I'm an old school guy. Like I actually still play my instruments. And in a world where people are like in the box, there's a lot of sampling, there's a lot of clipping, there's a lot of cloning, there's a lot of copy and pasting.
Hmm.
And there are people who are being called musicians. They're actually producers and engineers that are moving notes around on a grid.
See, that's what I thought. I said that because my father. I grew up on music where musicians actually played their instruments, right? So I was just a little boy hearing this, and now you hear it. Everything's it's like these, like you said, samples, and I don't know what you call that. Is it auto tuning or whatever they
There's
do with the voice?
yeah, auto tune and pitch
I
control and
ah I
vocoders. I am very much not, and then there's AI now where people. One thing I really got annoyed at is like there was this DJ, won't name him. He took like Eminem's voice and made him say something that he never said. He made him say, "I love trance." He never ever said that, and he actually put that into one of his songs. And I found that kind of offensive in that somebody could take AI and take any artist's voice and make them say something they never said.
oh man, that sounds
And I,
scary. That sounds
yeah, it's
scary.
very scary.
Oh
and
Jesus. Not even from a music perspective. I could think of a lot of nefarious things that people are going to do with that. Oh my
yeah, it's
goodness.
just not cool. And my whole thing with music is just like, and anything that's art because it's being done in Hollywood and filming and in programming, getting this artificial intelligence to kind of clone and copy instead of original thought. Like, how are you going to get a Bill Gates or a Steve Jobs, which original ideas, if all you do is clone what already exists, which tends to be where AI can take something that existed and say, hey, make me sound like Bob Dylan.
Hmm.
So
Oh
it'll
man.
look for Bob Dylan and make you sound like it, but it's not really original. It's a
See,
derivative.
but I look at this and I think this is why it's going to be even easier to succeed. It may seem because like so many shortcuts are being taken, and I love technology. I've tried the GPTs out and everything. It's a tool to help assist you, to help enhance you. And that's kind of the way like I look at different health technologies. Like I have a wearable on right now. I have a wearable on right now. I use a lot of
Mhm.
data. Yeah, I use a lot of data, and I have a whole shipment place over here for it, right? But it doesn't make you. It doesn't control you. It's a thing that helps enhance you for what you already are. And I see that a lot of times now that I think I'm worried more about critical thinking. Are we going to lose that ability to critically think?
Yeah, that's what I worry about
Y- You
because
know,
if people can get somebody to write your term paper with AI,
mhm.
right, then you're not really writing it,
Yeah,
right? So you're not learning
yeah,
that process of doing that research, which I
yeah.
think is critically important for you to actually go do that research. Just like I think for a musician, it's critical that you actually go and learn how to play your own song.
Hmm.
So when you play it live, you're just not in the box, that you actually can play it.
Yeah.
Um, and that's why I always tell kids, like, even when I'm working with guys who do videos, is like, I'd rather have a video director that's actually not using AI, but actually has ideas
Hmm.
and making choices about what they're going to film because they have an aesthetic. And maybe that aesthetic was influenced by Orson Welles or was influenced by Scorsese or whatever. But they have an aesthetic, and still, when they do it, it's them,
Hmm.
right? They may have been influenced by somebody, but it's still them. It's like kind of like I tell people, like Stevie Ray Vaughan did Voodoo Child, and then Hendrix did Voodoo Child. The
Hmm.
the Stevie Ray Vaughan version of Voodoo Child is a Texas blues influenced version
Hmm.
versus the cosmic version that Hendrix did. They're both the same piece of music. They don't sound the same at all.
Yeah. I love standards, and that's a great example. Right. I love jazz standards, and there's so many different versions of a song, but they're going to be different. Like the way Marvin Gaye will do a standard on some of his early, even pre Motown work or early Motown work before he became known for the albums that
Yeah,
everyone
yeah.
knows him for.
He was even a drummer. He was a drummer too.
Yeah, yeah, his is gonna sound different than Sinatra's
Oh yeah, definitely.
when they did the same thing, and that's gonna be different than a Bocelli. Those are all different genres,
Yeah.
and so I think I kind of lost my thought on that. Oh, just on how you make it yours. Yeah, on how you make it yours, just to further enforce that point that you made right there.
But when you're talking about wearables, like as a diabetic, I've kind of
Hmm.
really dived into wearables. I'm using
Hmm.
like something I wear that automatically sends my numbers.
Oh, CGM.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
actually tells me if I'm going too low or too high. And then, as a musician, it's helped me because I don't have to finger prick.
Hmm.
And being a keyboardist or a guitar player, being a diabetic, that's always been a problem. Like the
Hmm.
fact that we have to prick our fingers, it hurts. When you're trying to play guitar or
Hmm.
piano, you don't want to have to keep on pricking your fingers. It's like it gives you extra hassle. The
Hmm.
fact that you can get this sensor that you're wearing, giving you really good information, and you can make better choices about what you're going to eat,
Hmm.
if you should eat, if you should hydrate more. It just tells you where your body is, and I
Hmm.
find that's very useful to kind of stay on my plan.
Absolutely. I think that's even for non-diabetics out there. That's something useful. Now, you probably don't need it permanently, but doing a cycle of it, maybe like a month or two or so,
Hmm.
to really learn that is good. It's beneficial. That's one of the tools that I have at the disposal. So I have access to everything. It was one of my goals. I take inspiration once again. Talk about creativity. I take a lot of inspiration from Batman. Batman's one of my inspirations. So,
Yeah,
so I
yeah,
kind of I kind of treat myself like Batman, and I think of health like Batman. So instead of like gadgets to go fight crime and everything, there's a lot of tools and things to help keep my health enhanced and to further enhance it and at my disposal. So I look at things that way, and I try to look at strategy like Batman. But to kind of bring that back to what you were talking about with the CGMs, CGMs is a great tool. It's because I think metabolic health, that's and a big part of that is blood sugar dysregulation, diabetes. That's a big part of it. And a lot of times people are maybe even pre-diabetic before they even
yeah. And
know
they
it.
wouldn't know. You
Yeah,
wouldn't know if you're
yeah.
not checking it.
And see, that's one of my gripes. That's one of my gripes also is that I don't like I don't like the ranges that they have right now when it comes to like glucose, fasting insulin, A1C, and
Mhm.
even a lot of times some of the standard tests I have to. I mean, if I don't order it for the client themselves, sometimes they'll just go. Sometimes they'll just go to the doctor and do it.
To
And
A1C, like the
well,
A1C,
well,
you
well,
think?
they well they won't get it. Sometimes they'll just give them their fasting glucose,
Hmm.
and so they won't give them the fasting insulin and the A1C. And you want all three because
Yeah,
that gives you a whole picture of how you're
yeah,
living because the
a
fasting glucose,
holistic.
yeah, the
Yeah,
fasting glucose can be manipulated depending on like
yeah,
the
yeah.
previous day or so. So you can manipulate that. And so you want the whole picture. My dad was a diabetic and everything. And
I'm a type 2. I'm a
yeah,
type 2, which is, type
insulin.
1's like type 2s, you don't have to take insulin, but I'm at the point where I'm taking insulin
Yeah.
because 'cause I've had it for like 20 years,
Yeah.
and it progressively gets worse, and then I had to start taking insulin, but,
So your pancreas is not just doing its job in a
it's not
nutshell.
doing what it's supposed to, so
Yeah.
like type 2s, you're always watching what you eat.
Hmm.
And the carbohydrates and sugar will affect your sugar like immediately,
Hmm.
like every diabetic. But like we tend to like lower the carbs as much as we can, and try to eat vegetables and water, and just be mindful. Like I can't drink alcohol pretty much. Like, and that's usually a really big problem with type twos. Like if they're alcoholics or they like alcohol, it can damage your liver
Yeah.
really bad because people, they just have a hard time giving up alcohol.
Mhm. Yeah, and another thing is actually even simpler than that is managing your weight. That
Yeah,
goes a
yeah,
big part. That goes a long way as well. It's just managing your weight. That's why, when you think about metabolic health, it's looking at this whole thing in totality. A great
yeah,
way is
definitely.
to keep your manage your weight. That's one of the easiest steps
Yeah, when I
to do.
dropped like 40 pounds,
And
uh,
I bet your numbers
boy,
went
my numbers
down.
got way better. It's
Yeah.
just really like if you're over 200, I dropped down to like 178, was like
Yeah.
224,
Hmm.
and it significantly impacted
Hmm.
my diabetic health. And it's a problem is a lot of people has that sedentary lifestyle, well,
Hmm.
especially in IT programming. Because
Yeah.
people get, like it's a badge of honor to sit at that chair. And I'm always trying to tell my guys, like, don't just sit at the chair because you're going to end up going out on a medical for something because not taking care of yourself, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
And when we think about that too, I also, encourage people, even if you do have some kind of, thing right now that's going on, is to not really even identify with it that much and to just maybe call it like a situation and not really strongly identify that and let that become who you are. Like, how many times have you heard someone say
Mhm.
that I'm an overweight person? I always have this weight. And so
Oh, yeah.
so you're affirming what you are, because what we speak has power. We can speak life or death with our
You
tongue.
probably stay that way too.
Yeah, and you're going
Yeah.
to stay that way.
Your
And so you
mindset.
hear,
Your mind.
yeah. So, um, so as we think about what's something actionable you can do, is to, when we talked about optimal health starts inside out, is to become the person who you become that person today. And I know that might sound strange. So say, hey, I have 25 pounds to lose. Well, you can start today becoming the person who is 25 pounds lighter. So how do you do that? If I'm 25 pounds heavier right now, what do you mean become this other person? Well, how would a person who's 25 pounds lighter, how would they move? How would they go about their day? How would they act? I bet they wouldn't sit at their desk for 10 straight hours. They would probably be a little more active as well. They would probably be mindful of what they eat. So those are all things that you can do right now. Even if you're quote unquote 25 pounds heavier right now, you almost have to ignore this reality, ignore this current state, because this current state is only a manifestation of the actions that have been taken from the past. And so tomorrow and the future can be different, but it can only be different if we start changing the actions in this very present moment, because the future doesn't exist yet. The only thing that exists right now is this very moment. So, in a nutshell, you have to change and become that person in this moment if you expect the future to be any different.
Yeah, I always feel like sometimes people are kind of stuck in a pattern
hmm
because they're repeating a past behavior.
No,
And
it's hard to sometimes it's. I try to watch myself saying it's hard to change and stuff, because if you say something's hard, it is going to be hard. But as humans, we're kind of wired to be lazy. We're kind of wired
yeah,
to be efficient. This is how
mm,
we survived. And so you kind of have to fight against biology a little bit. Or you kind of have to stack the conditions in your favor. Make things super easy for you. For food, for example, I don't really have junk food around me. And if I do like want a bunch of cookies or something, I'm either eating all the cookies, and whatever this leftover I'm throwing away or I'm giving away. I'm just not going
mhm,
to keep it. I'm just not going to keep it though. Because
mhm,
A, I don't need to waste my mental energy on that, when that energy can be better allocated towards some of my work, toward having more productive conversations, or whatever. It doesn't need to be me fighting this thing here. Is like, oh, I gotta avoid this. I gotta avoid this. So just don't even have it around. And
yeah.
if you want to treat yourself every now and then, enjoy it in that moment and then get rid of it.
Well, since I'm a creative person, I like to cook. And what I did is like found a way to cook more healthy food with a combination of my daughter. We have a hydroponic garden. So we have indoor hydroponic gardens that where we can grow fresh veggies and we can control a lot of
Whoa,
vegetables that we grow ourselves. So
that
then
is cool.
there's no there's no like debate about, oh, it costs too much to get the veggies. So we grow all kinds of really cool veggies with these modern hydroponics that my daughter got into, and we've been doing it for the last 4 years. And we can, we do a lot of really cool stuff with that. And then just I think really cooking, because if you get stuck, doing the takeout and all the different takeout services, you get a lot of stuff that the American portion size. I've always made, because I lived in Japan, and in Japan the portion size was
Yeah.
more like what it should be, right,
hmm
for your health, right. But when you come to America, like the portion size for like three people for one person, right,
hmm
and you're like, it's just the way the industry has set this stuff up, and people think they got to eat everything on their plate, and that's
That's
like a
true.
bad behavior to
That's true.
get locked into.
I will say I like the portion sizes, just because well, that's because I'm heavily involved in a sport, so I have a high caloric requirement. But for the probably ninety
Most people,
percent
it did.
for the
Yeah.
90% out there, this is terrible. This is terrible, because I remember when I went to Europe, I went to Portugal and Porto, and so I ordered a piece of fish and some potatoes. And so I was thinking, okay, it came out. I was thinking it's going to be close to like American size. So I get this, and I was like, man, this thing's only like 4 or 5 ounces. And
You
so
gotta order two of them.
so I called the guy. I'm like, hey, can I get a couple more orders? He's like, really? I was like, yeah. He's like, oh, okay, you're American. We didn't know if you were American, but now we know that you're American. We thought you were French at first, because I guess my name's popular in France, right? So he thought I was French at first, but then he's like, that gave it away right there. I was like, I guess is this what Americans are known for? I guess a little bit,
Yeah,
but yeah, I had to order multiple dishes, but I had to explain to him. I was like, hey, I got a weight requirement I got to keep, and I burn a lot of calories.
yeah.
But
If you're active, you
yeah,
can handle it. If you're the problem is that most a lot of
yeah.
Americans are sedentary,
But the
and then
funny thing is,
they can't
yeah,
get it.
the funny thing though, even when I was over there, even for a 6 week span, it was hard to keep weight on because the way everything is designed, you just walk everywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
You
In
walk
Tokyo, it was
everywhere.
like that
Yeah.
too. Yeah,
Yes. And
it
so,
was walking like everywhere.
yeah.
I didn't have a car,
Yeah.
and
So,
even when you use the taxi and use the the public transportation like the subway, you have to walk a lot. And
mhm,
I was like very low weight when I was in Tokyo from 2004 to 2006. I eat mostly fish and veggies all the time,
mhm,
hardly any red meat, and just soft drinks, all different types of teas,
mhm,
tons of different varied teas that actually had all kinds of beneficial health effects. And I continue to drink those teas even today instead of soda.
mhm.
And as a diabetic, soda is like the killer. You can't really have it.
Yeah, it's a lot of it's a lot of sugar in there, and then a lot of other not so good
Other
stuff
stuff you don't need.
as well. And so I don't really demonize any food because sugar has its purpose, but it's very easy to overdo sugar. To
Yeah,
put that, yeah,
especially in America, it's like in everything. Like
yeah, it's
salt and sugar between the
yeah,
2
yeah.
and fat is like
It's all
it's all over everything.
it's almost the American way. Everything. I said the beauty and the beast, the gift and the curse about America is that everything's in excess. Everything is
Yeah,
in excess.
way above
Everything.
what it should be.
Everything is in excess, and so that
Maximum overload.
there's good with that, but then there's also a lot of negatives with that as well.
I found I had to leave half the stuff on my plate or even more than half
Hmm.
as a diabetic just to be able to keep my numbers right. And then with all these CGMs, I can actually tell immediately, and then I said, well, it's just easier to make my own stuff.
Yeah.
So I just started, and I like it. It's creative. It's not a hassle. Some people that's a hassle, and so
Yes.
that's hard. If it's a hassle, then you have to find a different way. But
I think you found a way to enjoy because I mean I think about this like not only are you getting healthy food, but you're also getting time to bond and further build connection and memories together. And so I think a lot of families could do that.
hydroponics are really cool because if you're, in my case, I was concerned about pesticides.
Hmm.
And pesticides are like no matter, even if you got organic food from the
Yeah.
grocery store,
Hmm.
still high levels. And because of my type of cancer, it was kind of known that there was a dotted line to pesticides.
Wow.
So I'm like, I wanted to control. And if I have the hydroponics, I'm totally controlling whether or not there's any pesticides on this stuff because there's nothing. And so I know there's zero because I grew it and I didn't put it on it. And so I know it doesn't have it. So I don't have to wash it off or
How
kind of.
complicated? How complicated is that? Is that you think that's easy to do for most people, or
Well,
what do you?
it's a little techy, and because me and my daughter are kind of techy, but it
Mhm,
involves like a bunch of pumps. There's systems we bought. We bought these systems, and basically the plants are on these tiers, and they use like LED lighting, and they've got pumps and timers. And we did learn about different types of food, plants that will grow, like tomatoes and
mhm.
lettuce, and different types of cabbages, and all kinds of really good high vitamin things that we can grow. And we started to expand all the different types of things that we can grow from beans, different types of beans to all different types of lettuces and cabbages and different types of tomatoes and cucumbers and all kinds of really good things to have that I don't have to worry about pesticides being on it. So I
Well,
can actually have my greens every day with other like beans, good protein from beans and all kinds of other things you can do.
yeah. Well, if you ever want a project you can do, I'm sure you can start teaching people how to do this. Make a book or some
Oh, I
videos
should
for
do a
people.
YouTube masterclass.
I think people would. That sounds like a pretty decent business idea because I say this is one of the things that's coming in the future. So you're ahead of I think you're ahead of your time. This is one of the things where you're ahead of your time. Just like a lot of the stuff that I talk about with genetics and different molecules and different hallmarks of aging, y- you're you're like 2 to 3 years ahead before mainstream catches on. But the moment you start seeing it in the news a lot, or the moment you start seeing a lot of videos or articles about it, it's when it hits mainstream. But I think this is something that is it's becoming necessary in a lot of places, especially there's places in the U.S. that are a lot that are very polluted, very polluted,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Very
so
bad.
so this becomes a this something like this will be a necessity. It's not even like a luxury. It's going to become a necessity because it's so polluted in some of these more urban environments and everything.
Yeah, I definitely believe in the urban environment. It's a really good way to control the
Hmm.
what you're getting, and you really need to have vegetables. And a lot of times, urban areas are food deserts. Everybody knows about that. And then even when you
Absolutely.
get to rural areas, you can grow it, but they're highly polluted.
Hmm.
And farmland is one thing. Americans, I want to go on my soapbox, but a lot of commercial farmland is like an EPA toxic dump. It's so full of 20, 30, 40, 50 years of all kinds of really bad carcinogens.
Hmm.
And people think because there's plants on it that it's healthy. But if
No.
you actually check the soil and check the water that they're putting on the plants, you're like, what the heck?
Yeah. I had a conversation with a lady recently on my podcast about a lot of this, and like it's causing different fertility problems for a lot of people, and like even just something like men's testosterone levels, like the levels of testosterone for a man my age is probably half, or well, I hope not. Well, not for me, I hope not, but not for me,
Yeah,
but
it's bad. Yeah, there's a lot of bad impacts.
but for a lot of but the average person compared to a couple generations ago, the testosterone levels for men are half, and that's a pretty big deal. And women are struggling with that as well, and a lot of this has come from the different pesticides and a lot of the phthalates and a whole bunch of other endocrine
Yeah,
disruptors.
you got the forever chemicals, you've got the microplastics
Hmm.
that are getting into your stuff. So if you can grow at home and you don't get those
Hmm.
microplastics embedded on your stuff, you don't get the pesticide, you don't get all those other, the VOCs and the forever chemicals. And it's like everywhere. And the problem is like, that's why you want to get control. Kind of like it's like, oh, well, that's what they're going to use on Mars. Yeah, it is what they're going to use on Mars,
Hmm.
but you can use it now.
Yeah.
So why not?
Yeah.
That's the way
No,
I look.
and this is scaring people. I would say if you have access, a lot of gyms, you have access, you can use a sauna to help a little bit in terms of like kind of getting some of those heavy metals out and everything.
Detox
And so,
out, yeah.
yeah, use a sauna a lot, and saunas are very beneficial in terms of they can almost mimic like cardiovascular activity,
Oh, wow.
and,
Is there
and
other
so.
ways to detox besides the sauna? Is there other things that you recommend?
Um, I think the sauna's a
Those are
very
the
easy
best ones, they're easy.
sauna's a very easy one, because it's so hot in there and you're sweating out. I think there's different. You could probably look at things like keeping your glutathione levels up.
Mhm.
That's probably that's our master antioxidant. I talked to a gentleman a long time ago on the show about glutathione and everything that it does. His name is Dr. Patel. It's one of my earlier episodes, and yeah, I'll probably say glutathione's a big one. There's things like NAC that can help, and um, but all in all, I think probably the glutathione and
Yeah, sauna.
probably
Yeah.
probably the sauna is probably what I'm thinking about at the top of my head in terms of probably giving you the most bang for your buck. But with the glutathione, just I wouldn't take it orally. I wouldn't take it oral
Mhm.
because it's not going to pass digestive your stomach and everything. So that would definitely need to be topical. And there's a lot of the topical ones I don't like, and
Mhm.
the one I do like, it's a little more expensive, but I at least know it works. I even notice a difference on it, and so
Well, that's cool. So
yeah.
people, if they contact you to get that report, that kinda gets them started on the path to figuring out how to be into executive health with their life, right?
Yeah, so this report, yeah, is basically it's a handful of things that you can start doing today. Maybe tomorrow, some of them might take you a little more planning to do, but it's actions that you can do now to start to really start taking control of your health, not really falling into this predetermined thing they call aging, where aging has such a bad reputation, where it's always talking about you get colder, you get stubborn weight, you don't think as sharply. I mean, it sounds horrific. When I think of aging, I think of more experience. You see a lot of athletes now; they just get better with time, and
Yeah.
so that's kind of the way I think about it. But yeah, and it's also a way to everything on there recommended is I wanted to make it to where it's accessible to everyone. A lot of the things I realize are not as accessible to everyone because they're still new. And as anything new in this technology, the early adopters pay the most until the costs come down. So that report is just an entryway. And then if they're interested or they want to know more, they can feel free to
Dive in
con-
more.
contact me. And I sit with people for 30 minutes at least,
That's
sometimes
cool.
longer. And
Do you
it's
do
not even,
that like virtually, or do you have like appointments?
oh, we can do it. I do it virtually. Most everything's virtually. I mean, if you're in the Nashville area and you want to
Mhm.
meet, I would love to do that. I'm so zoomed out. I
Yeah,
mean,
zoomed
I
out,
look,
yeah,
I enjoy. Yeah, I'm zoomed out. So anytime I get the opportunity to
yeah,
do something in person, I'm
yeah.
definitely doing that. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I do
So
wanna start doing in-person podcasting again, but, I
oh
haven't
man,
been able to do
yeah.
that. Well, we have a pitch to kinda get a sponsor so we can actually go to the country where we interview people.
Hmm.
So, we get to interview people in, like, Berlin and Japan and Australia, and we've done it virtually, but our pitch to our sponsors is, like,
Hmm.
go and do the day in the life of a guest and actually stay with them and do that podcast after being with them,
That
and
is cool.
that's the idea, the pitch, and we're hoping to get that done,
That is
sooner than
cool.
later.
That is cool, and that is absolutely unique.
That's
That's
our
Yeah,
idea, but,
that's absolutely unique because, I've never seen that done. I haven't seen
yeah,
anywhere
it's
done.
hard now. It's like trying to pitch it and to do it in a COVID safe way
Yeah,
is cool, but, like, I wanna do it because I think it would be really beneficial and kinda move me in a different direction. Like, I've always been into changing, a lot of what I've had to do is significantly change, my comfort zone.
mhm.
Um, and I push myself to do that because I find if I get stuck in a pattern, I just get bored and I gotta go into something else.
It's the same
So
thing, man. I'm the absolute same way. A a lot of the things I do now became I was curious in it. I wanted to test these things, and luckily I have good contacts, and so I got to contact different scientists and different founders who are having these different health technology and everything. And I tried it on myself. I was like, wow, I think this will be useful. Maybe I can create a service to have all these things and everything. And I think curiosity will take you so many wonderful places. But the only thing with curiosity is sometimes the places that it's taking you is so unfamiliar, and sometimes you might feel so alone that you might get scared and want to go back to something safer, something more convenient that everybody else is doing. And that's
well, that's
the
always like
that,
yeah,
yeah, that's the
I
battle that you
definitely
have to do.
I definitely remind people, like, as a musician or a creative person, we fail, like, all the time. Like,
Yeah.
musicians, like, we write 100 songs, one of them works, right?
Hmm.
So most of them didn't work. So you're in a kinda, like, creative exercise where most of your ideas don't work, right?
Yeah.
And so it is inherently like, you have to be able to get beyond the fact that 99 of your things didn't work and one of them did. But you have a mindset where that's not a problem. If
Yeah.
you're the type of person where that becomes a problem, you have a hard time creating because
Yeah.
then you get depressed that your 99 didn't work.
And I think that's why it's also good to create every day. Because, and so that I kinda look at this like running as well, like, whatever I accomplish yesterday, the day's over, and it's a new day, and I have to go earn it again, and I have to go create again, I have to go train again, I have to go box again, go lift again, because that day's done, and I don't have time to rest on my laurels. It's the same thing I think with creating, music and everything. Whatever you created yesterday, it's good and all, but it's a new day and it's time to create again. Because if you rest on that, you become complacent. And I don't really believe in just you can just stay in the middle. I think you're either always either decreasing or you're increasing.
Mhm.
And so I think to think that you can just stay steady as is the whole time, I think it's a fallacy. I
Yeah.
think you're declining. You may not feel like you're declining, but you are definitely declining, or maybe somebody's getting ahead of you, or maybe you're just loosening your skill, and that sword that you have is becoming a little duller.
Yeah, I think that's why I still like I practice a lot and I create a lot of
Hmm.
content, from doing the podcast to producing other people's records to diving into beyond just talking with musicians, like talking to people like yourself. And I think we're kind of at the close of our time, but it always goes by quickly. But I do feel that our talk can help all types of people and
Hmm.
anybody who is like in business for themselves or and they need to also think about the legs, the pillars of who they are. And
Hmm.
I think this idea of executive health is not just for some CEO. It's like you are need to apply that kind of executive thinking to your own life for
Hmm.
your health. I like the idea that you brought to us when we first talked. That's a really cool concept, and I think people should really take that to heart and maybe watch this again and kind of get the picture of that. And I'm thankful that you came on the show today. I think this is really going to help people. I hope a lot of people check out the www.executivehealth.io/report for those of you who are on the audio version of this podcast. Uh, Hope you check that out. And I'm really happy that you came on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always an honor anytime I get invited to or get the opportunity just to speak with someone. This is like coming. This is like being invited to someone's house and hanging out with their friends and family. So I definitely appreciate that.
Well, thank you. And we will have this published all over the web. It'll be on Apple Podcast, Google. It'll be on iHeartRadio. It'll be on a lot of cool places. So wherever somebody's comfortable, checking out a podcast, we will be there. We're on most of the big platforms. So we'll send that to you so your audience knows. So thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you so much.